Hello, I'm Monica, the Creative Beast, and I am here with a very special video flip through of a rather interesting early art book that I made in my creative art book career, if we can call it a career. I am the Creative Beast because I work in a lot of different forms and mediums, and book art has been one of the most recent book forms. And back around 2010, I was able to join what became my very first and so far only art retreat experience with the Artful Journey retreat that took place in Santa Cruz. And I actually attended the Artful Journey retreat numerous times until it finally came to a close in 2016. I was sad to see it close, but I was glad to be a part of it every year that they had an event. My very first year in 2010, I participated in a workshop called the Funky Chunky Art Book that was led by Kelly Ray Roberts and Mady Rose. And I had a blast learning about making some fun art books, recycling old books to make a new book, learning different kinds of art techniques to make fun backgrounds and artful pages, which was also an introduction to art journaling for me. So it was a really wonderful experience. I love the Artful Journey Retreat, and I will always love the Artful Journey Retreat. I keep my eyes open for another form of art retreat, and there might be one on the horizon through the Are You Book Enough community, which is always exciting. And I share a lot of my books that I make for the Are You Book Enough monthly challenge here on my YouTube channel. So feel free to look for those. Just look under playlists and you'll see some of the art books, altered art books and art journals that I share. And you'll find all my Are You Book Enough art books in one playlist. But this particular art book was one that I created not long after my first art retreat experience. And I am sharing this book because it relates to an essay that I wrote for Kelly Pratt and her community project, the Getting Your Groove Back series of stories of women who found a way to get their groove back after a challenge in their life. So my story relates to this book, and it relates to some things that I believe a lot of people are probably experiencing right now in the midst of this pandemic virus issue we are having around the globe. My essay relates to frustration. It relates to isolation. It relates to uncertainty and things being beyond your control. So I will have some links so you can find my essay. If you haven't seen it by now, if you haven't joined Kelly Pratt's Go Do It Society and her Getting Your Groove Back stories, if you're not on my newsletter where I am also going to be sharing this story, then there'll be some links beneath this video so that you can find ways to read my essay. But my essay is about uncertainty and isolation and how it was miserable for me. Let me just paint as quick as I can make picture of all the elements that created the perfect storm for my situation. I was working for a nonprofit, and somewhere around 2008, I began to realize that I was getting overloaded with work that really should have been somebody else's job. So I essentially had the duties of a program manager without the pay or the actual title. So I was overworked. It was an after-school program. And because there was a lot of state funding, our pay got cut. So I was overworked and literally underpaid, which I'm sure some people can relate to. Around 2008, our program moved out of the main office headquarters and into another area that wound up being a longer commute for me and was incredibly isolated. The location, I referred to it as the compound often because it felt like a compound. It was gray. There were small windows. You had to have a key to get into the compound. You had to have a key to get into the office. You had to have a key to get into the bathroom and the break room. So while we were sharing the office space with a different program, it's not like I could just walk over and chat with people. If I ran into people from that program, then I would have an opportunity to have interaction with somebody. But a lot of people from my own department, even my own program director, were not in the office often because our programs were at school locations. They often worked remotely. My own program director, she was a wonderful person. She had to leave the office a lot to go to meetings at the headquarters, so I was left alone a lot. I was isolated more than I liked, and it was not fun. And while I was trying to find a job, this was at a time when the economy tanked and there weren't a lot of jobs to be had. So there was uncertainty when I would be able to leave this position. There was uncertainty how long it was going to last. And it just became a real perfect storm of absolute misery for me. And when I would share my unhappiness with my circumstances with some people, they would dismiss me with, I should be grateful to have a job because so many people are out of work right now. But it's hard to be grateful to have a job when your work environment is causing you so much distress, unhappiness, and misery. And maybe some of you can relate to that in terms of uncertainty, how long the situation will last, and being somewhat isolated from people you like being around. So I began to make what I call my office art book. And the office art book actually began as a way for me to collect all the inspiring items that I had on an inspiration board in my little cubicle. I had lots of quotes. I had little snippets of images. Being a mixed media artist, I like to have visual inspiration. And as a big avid book reader, I'm inspired by words. So quotes, meaningful quotes mean a lot to me. So I would have a lot of those things on a board near my desk at my old office space, and I had the same at the new office space. And then I realized I would want to take that with me, but if I had a new job, how could I just take the inspiration board and zoom out the door? So I thought I can put all of these beautiful visual bits in a little book, which I can put into my drawer in my desk, and if that wonderful day I get a new job comes, I can just grab the book and go! Which never quite happened because the program eventually got closed. I was lucky. It meant that I would be laid off, which meant that there would be unemployment if I had not been able to find employment by that last day. And because the economy tanked, it was not easy to get another job. I got maybe one interview for one job, and the woman who interviewed me, God bless her, she really acknowledged the amount of work that I had had to do to move our office spaces into one new location, but I didn't get the job. So, yeah, there was finally a day where I learned that the program was being closed and I had an end to the uncertainty. But even though I had an end date, there was a part of me that also realized that I might get a little irritated and agitated as those last days were unfolding. So part of my essay, my story, is that I had an online community, and I called on that online community for help in those last weeks. And they came through, and it was fantastic. So I would say some of the lessons from my story are that you can connect to creativity, your own creativity, in whatever form that takes for you, because creativity is different for everybody. It could be writing, it could be music, it could be painting, it could be drawing, it could be sewing, it could be gardening, it could be baking, it could be making a meal, it could be photography. It's creativity dwells in a lot of different places and in a lot of different things. And also community is what helps get us through. And I've been very connected to online communities for a long time. So online communities are not new to me, but they've been really fantastic, and they've always been a saving grace. And I'm so grateful that we have this technology now that allows us to connect to people overseas, and we can find people, like-minded souls, kindred spirits who like things that we can talk to and connect with and revel in what we love. So online communities are a wonderful, beautiful thing. But I talk about my office art book in my essay, and I talk about communities in my essay, and those are the elements that help me get my groove back in that awful situation. But my office art book is, I think, a fun book, and it details a lot of different things, not just elements that I had surrounding me for visual inspiration, but it also became a bit of a record of my time in the office as everything was unfolding around me. And there are a few little elements of the pay cut and other elements around my frustration. So let me go ahead and share the office art book. OAB, office art book. So one of the limitations of this art book that was kind of a restriction I imposed was I could only use things that were in the office. And if you're wondering about this paper, because I was working for an after-school program, there were donations for our kids all the time. And somebody had donated this lovely scrapbook paper. In fact, they had donated like a whole pack of this same paper. So I had a few sheets that I nicked from our storage and took with me to the office that I had because it was just so pretty to look at. And I eventually figured I would use it to make this art book. Some elements eventually came into play after I had been filling this book for a while and using all my visual inspiration bits to make the pages. So these little tags came from home, but I would, maybe do a few things at home and bring them to add to the book later, such as this ribbon. This ribbon here was added to make this element. This is a little colored tag and these tags. So some things would be done maybe at home, and then I would bring things to the office so they could be added to the art book. So, but the art book was, to all intents and purposes, created within the office, primarily using any materials and supplies that were in the office on hand. So this element and this element generally relay the theme of the office art book. So let's start with this element here. And I have an online classroom, and I have a freebie course called Hidden Message, which is learning the squash book fold. And this is a highlight of that course. It's the focal image of my course, and it's opened. So I use the squash book to make this element, which is a nice decorative element for an art book. And the message is part of the theme of this office art book. So we shall draw from the heart of suffering itself, the means of inspiration and survival, by Winston Churchill. So I made some little covers and used some of the colored paper that we had in the office, and figured out on my own finally how to do this squash fold. And then I added ribbon as I figured out the mechanics for how this was going to work on my book. So it would stay tied, because if you've worked with the squash fold in any way, it's like an accordion, and accordions don't stay closed of their own accord unless you tie them or belly band them closed. So that is part of the theme of this book. And this here So this little tag is kind of faded a little bit over time. I used some pale colored ink and a little bit of embossing powder to raise it on the surface, but it essentially spells G-A-M-A-N, gammon, or gammon. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, but essentially it is a Japanese word to describe the concept: to bear the seemingly unbearable with patience and dignity. So those are the two prevailing concepts behind this office art book. So you can see I used all the bits of scrapbook paper, which was a 12 by 12 sheet. I had a couple sheets, so I used little bits here and there, and we had colored paper also in the office that I used. So the color scheme of the book is essentially lavender and like buff and cream. And I would use, the cardboard backing of pads of lined paper. So I would keep those because I'm a huge recycler. I rarely ever throw things out because I know they can be used for something. So the cardboard backing of lined paper became the basis for the covers of the book. So I covered them in the scrapbook paper and then did the end papers in colored office paper. And again, because it was an after-school program, we had ring binders. So I was able to use ring binders. And I would use old file folders for card stock and hard card pages and other elements. So you're going to see a lot of that in this office art book. So I would find quotes and things, and I would post them on my inspiration board in my office. And then I took them down and started cutting them decoratively and adding bits of file folder papers, because there would be lots of file folders that got really worn and a little shabby, but some of the card stock was still good. So let's start with these quotes. Who are you? Someone asks. I am the story of myself, comes the answer. Quote from M. Scott Momaday. And I think somebody said this somewhere, a delightful surprise awaits you. And while I'm not sure that being burned out at an office was a delightful surprise, there are some delightful surprises in this book. So these were connected with a little scrap of cardstock and covered in scrapbook paper. And here's some colored paper. So sometimes there's just some blank pages to separate some of the artful ones. I saw this image of a dragon somewhere on the internet, so I found a way of downloading it and making a color copy at the office on some nice thick cardstock. And one of my favorite bands is Ozzo Motley, and one of their albums is called Don't Mess with the Dragon. So yeah, don't mess with the dragon. And the dragon makes up part of Chinese astrology, and I'm into esoteric things like regular zodiac astrology and Chinese astrology. So there's a lot of stuff behind that image. And this is an old Chinese proverb that I really, really love. I keep it in my mind often, and I'll explain it if it doesn't make any sense to you. At least I'll explain how I think it means or what it means for me. When you meet a master swordsman, show him your sword. When you meet a man who is not a poet, do not show him your poem. And what I think that means is when you meet somebody who is highly skilled in something that you love, you show them what you're working on, because a master will appreciate what you're working on no matter what level you're at. But if you meet somebody who is not interested in the things that you're interested in, don't show them your work, because they won't get it and they won't understand. And I have sadly found in my life sometimes they just want to tear you down because they're not doing it themselves. So this looks probably familiar to everybody. I began to see this image. This has been a bumper sticker I've seen everywhere, so I liked it and I found it, and I downloaded it so I could have it as a visual inspiration on my board in my office. And I would begin to bring some of my rubber stamps and ink pads so I could just stamp little scraps that I was adding into this book. This is actually an image taken by somebody else online. I'm not sure who it might have been. There were a lot of blogs I was following at the time, and a lot of people sharing their beautiful photography. Sometimes I would just download an image so I could just have it to look at on my computer during the day, or I'd print it out so I could have it on my inspiration board. And I love peonies, so this page definitely made it into my book. You know, a reminder from Anne Frank, who definitely knew something about suffering and confinement and isolation. Think of all the beauty that's still left in and around the world, around you, and be happy. And there are still some small things that will be around us always that we can take pleasure in. It's not always easy sometimes when we're overwhelmed, but there's always something to please our eye. So my supervisor at the time of the move, she had actually come to work in a different capacity, and the program director that hired me stepped down into a position that he created for himself, and the organization should never have let him step down. It became a problem later, which I'll get into later on in this book. But the woman who came to work in a different capacity and became the program director, and I became her assistant because I was the assistant to the program director of an after-school program. She was a sweetheart. I love her dearly. We're connected on Facebook. So we are still kind of in touch that way. We see what's going on in our lives. She had a wonderful sense of humor. We made a really great team, and she's probably one of the best bosses I've ever really worked for. One of two that I can think of. So sometimes she would send me things through our inter-office email. So any of you who've worked at an office can relate. Quote of the day: I don't mind coming to work, but that 8-hour wait to go home is a bitch. So yeah, I had that on my office cubicle inspiration space. And because our after-school program also dealt with education, there were lots of educational quotes that I found inspiring. So sometimes I had them, tucked here and there, and then I just gathered them all together to put on this single sheet so it could become a whole page in my book. So I'll just share a few of them. The most important thing about education is appetite, from Winston Churchill again. Teachers teach more by what they are than by what they say. Sadly, I have no attribution for that one. Books are the quietest and most comforting of friends. They are the most accessible and wisest of counselors, and the most patient of teachers. This is probably why I love books so much. I love making them, I love reading them, I love altering them. There are 3 things to remember when teaching. Know your stuff, know whom you are stuffing, and then stuff them elegantly. Dr. Lola May, a prominent Chicago educator. Oh, I loved that one so much. Know your stuff, know who you're stuffing, and stuff them elegantly. That could kind of be said for food too, don't you think? Know whom you're stuffing and stuff them elegantly. So at the compound, I was given the option of where I would have my desk space, and I was given first dibs. So I was really glad for that. Thank God my program director was really sweet that way. So I took the window. I took a window, and it didn't look out onto much, but I still had window. I had a good light source. And she gave me this lovely little sculpture when we were still at the old office. I added that tiny little bell later. So she's just a sweet little angel. May all your dreams come true. So I had her in the corner, and I could look at her. I passed her along after I left the job because I didn't really need her anymore. And a lot of the images that are taken in this book, I will tell you if they are attributed to somebody else, but most of these photographs are my own. So that was a paper cutter. I no longer have it, but I decorated it. And then this little centerpiece came over here after I gave it a little color. This is another great quote. Grace is a multi-purpose word, contemplative and positive. Share, show, say, grace. I love that quote. One of my coworkers at headquarters, her name was Grace, and I made her a special little something with that for her office space. She's since also moved on to another better job. So this is kind of based on a blog I was following. Happy Hour is from 9 to 5. Alexander Kurolf, who's all about happiness in the workplace. I'll try to remember to link to his blog, and he's got a book, and he's done conferences, so it's really great. I really got a lot of comfort reading his blog and learning that a workplace could be a happy place if people were amenable to that. There wasn't much I could do about the isolation, but my program director was happy when I brought some of his ideas for our entire team and other ideas that I had on my own. So she was really great that way. Unfortunately, there wasn't much we could do about the isolation. But one of the things that Alexander Kurolf talks about is Abishglada and Karoshi. So this is, if you want to learn about the concept of arbetsglada versus karoshi, we turn the page. So arbetsglada is a kind of Swedish concept, and karoshi is a Japanese work ethic. And this is essentially from his blog post, Karoshi versus arbetsglada, and it talks about karoshi, which is really essentially amounting to death from overwork in Japan. It's been a very real thing in the past, and it's really not a good thing. And arbetsglada is actually about happiness in the workplace. So Alexander Karolf writes about that a lot in Happiness at the Workplace at his Happy Hour blog. And that is one of the blog posts. When we did our weekly meetings for our staff, one of our staff members would make sketches, and one day he made these sketches and he let me have them. So fun artwork from a coworker made during another boring meeting. I don't remember what the idea behind Vampire Sneeze was, but it was Vampire Sneeze. It's unfairly singled out. Poor little pig. Yeah, the word pig is used a lot. He's unfairly singled out. So this is a photo I took at the new office location in the neighborhood. It was Leimert Park, which is part of South Central Los Angeles. But the actual neighborhoods and the residential streets were quite lovely to walk, and this particular street was filled with jacaranda trees, which I love. So I just happened to take this picture of jacaranda trees, but when I glued it onto the page, some of the printer ink smeared, but jacarandas. Okay, and this is an element I had on my board, and I fixed it, so we just move the paper clip, and we can unfold this. If I had a coat of arms, this would be the motto. Let us read and let us dance. Two amusements that will never do any harm to the world. Voltaire said that. And I spent many years as a dancer, and I'm a big reader, and I love to read. So yeah, that would be my life motto. I'm not sure what the coat of arms would look like. Maybe toe shoes and books. I'll have to figure that out one day. This is an image I took in the neighborhood at Leimert Park, somebody's roses, the rose bush. Love roses. I love peonies more, but these pink roses are almost like peonies, so I took a picture. Had this little image. This is me, my dear boyfriend. Shh, he doesn't like being on the internet. This is a very, very early picture of the two of us. We love going to the fair, and he'll dress up, and I dress up, so we have a great time. That was a long, long time ago. These were some parking stickers from the old office that I accidentally brought with me. We didn't have these at our new office, so I just added them into a page. And I was reading Brene Brown at the time. This is before she got really, really big. She had a blog, and she had a few little cute printables, and she was talking about shame before she wrote her first book. And she was connected to Kelly Ray Roberts, so they'd met online. So integrate, don't alternate. And Kelly Ray here is brave in sadness, brave in love. So yeah, it takes bravery to just allow your sad feelings. There's nothing wrong with being sad. It's natural and it's human. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. But there's more about that another day when I'm talking about the grief recovery method. So this was an image that was some kind of an ad in a magazine, and I think I wound up making a photocopy, and then that was just another word from someplace else. And I'm not a big coffee drinker, but I like to pretend this is me. So this is a me page. Okay, and this is 2,000 years. This is a quick bullet point rundown. I call it the year it all went to hell. And the bullet points of how it went to hell. Troublemaker, also known as Idiot Boy. This was the program director who hired me and stepped down. He wound up becoming very territorial about things going on in the program. He made life very difficult for the program director that took over, made life a little challenging for me, whined a lot, sent a lot of whiny emails. Just, it was really not fun. And then there was the work overload, because I was doing other people's work, his own included, to be honest. There was moving to offices, which was beyond the scope of my responsibilities. Our organization did have an operations department who should have been doing it, but they put me in charge. and the relocation meant a longer commute and isolation. Yeah, I think some of us can relate to some of that now. So this is another folding page, and I won't go into all the details, but essentially this is an academic article about how traffic affects our mental health. And the title of the article, and this is only one page, I didn't take out the whole thing because it was a multi-page article, but the highlights that make sense are on this page, and that was what was important for this book for me and my personal story that goes into this book. So the academic title is Home Environment Consequences of Commute Travel Impedance. Essentially, metropolitan-wide problem of traffic congestion has become more severe, has adverse public health consequences with regard to physical and psychological well-being, stressful aspects of chronic exposure to traffic congestion, aversive, frustrating condition, has adverse effects on blood pressure, mood, frustration, tolerance, illness occasions, work absences, job stability, and overall life satisfaction. So, you know, traffic is a problem. And the thing is, I could see even back in 2008 that we had the technology that people could be doing their work remotely. I could have been doing my work remotely. I had a computer. I just needed some internet setup. I could have had access to email from afar. And now people are working from home. It's been 10 years, and finally people are starting to do their work at home, which they could have done. They didn't have to be in traffic. I think that people could be working a few days a week, but that's just me. This is another image I took, and I was taking an environmental science course at the time. So in Leimert Park, there was this beautiful, amazing tree, and this tree had some fantastic texture to it. And I took pictures, close-up pictures of the texture, which I've used for other things, sometimes for my own collage material. And in the environmental science class that I was taking that allowed me to leave work early a couple days a week, there was this phrase that really stuck out at me that I added because I felt like it really applied to my circumstances. Trees may be draped with vines, enveloped by strangler figs, loaded with epiphytes, also known as orchids and other plants that grow in trees, such that trees occasionally collapse under the weight of all the life they support. Yeah, I collapsed, had a nervous breakdown, and then I had to keep working. So this was a little envelope I made, and this was from some ad I saw somewhere, I don't know, but I just love the phrase, unacceptable employee behavior. This is where the old program director who stepped down kind of comes into play. Nasty and vindictive emails from a bad employee, open at your own risk. So yeah, so there are some whiny emails. I think I did eventually get rid of one. I kind of wish I hadn't, but in some ways I don't think I really needed it because I can still remember the day that he was whining about something and all this work he had to do. And I spent the day drafting a reply, looking at his email and thinking, did I really see what I just saw? Yes, I did see what I just saw. And I spent the day crafting a reply. And my new program director, she said, please be careful what you're saying. I want you to be careful. I said, I made sure that when I sent out my reply, I wasn't rude, I wasn't nasty, I wasn't vindictive, I wasn't petty in the tone that he had used when he sent out his original email. And I spent the day drafting my email, and I replied, and then I had a paragraph list of all the work that I was doing for the program, which far outweighed his own list. Because if there's anything I can't stand, it's when somebody is a hypocrite about their circumstances and just doesn't want to see how other people are doing more than they might be doing. It's rude. So this is a photograph, and I put it on cardstock and I tore the edges and I made it a folding page. I've never written in it, but the prompt to write is, how does it feel to hit a brick wall? Well, I know what it felt like to hit that brick wall. I don't think I really need to write about that. brick walls have great texture, don't you think? This was another story. So this is from NASA Image of the Day when they share photos of things going on in outer space. And this is Kabam, a short story of another bad day at work with some last minute crap and just more frustration. Some file folder with some rubber stamps. And this is actually rubber stamps that we had made for the program. I found these wonderful images from a book of Mexican art. And I'd gone to the program director to ask about making stamps to use for our office stuff. And it was the first program director, and he was a shadow artist, so he agreed to having those made. And I had them, and I used them, and I actually brought them home when the job was over because nobody else was going to use them. This was a quote on my board that relates to work. Stress is an ignorant state. It believes that everything is an emergency. Nothing is that important. Natalie Goldberg. So there was a lot of that went on in the office. It's very irritating. Everybody thinks their emergency takes precedence. But as an office quote goes, poor planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part. So this has a great story, and I'm going to share that on the next page. The story of Stay Negative. It had been a bad day of what would become many bad days and another bad drive home. I was driving along Vine Street when I thought I saw the word Stay Negative out of the corner of my eye. I did a double take and found this public service announcement on a billboard. It was a striking image, and the words Stay Negative were hard to miss. I had to chuckle to myself knowing this was a message from the universe letting me know it was okay to stay negative when people in my life were telling me otherwise, telling me to be thankful you still have a job. There are no jobs out there. Don't be so negative. It will bring more negativity in your life. None of that was helping me, but Stay Negative did. So when people are trying to make you do or feel something else, it's dismissive and it's not helpful. Sometimes in order to get through the feelings, you have to go through the feelings. Bypassing is not helpful. It only makes you feel worse. And when you're dismissed, it compounds the problem. Please don't do it. So this is a vase of roses from my old apartment home. My boyfriend gave me these one year for my birthday. I took a photograph and I had it on my inspiration board just so I could have flowers around me all the time, even if they were paper flowers. This is a vintage image I found somewhere on the internet. I call her Sassy Secretary because she's wearing a fabulous hat and a fur coat. Oh my God, or at least a fur trimmed coat. And she's got that awesome, awesome vintage typewriter. I love hats. She's like me in a past life as a secretary. That's what I like to think. So I took a lot of photographs in the neighborhood when we moved. I used to use a cool Pix from Nikon. It was red. Carried it with me everywhere. So I took a lot of photographs of the neighborhood and I decided to keep them in this book. So in Lemert Park, there was this beautiful, huge fountain, this wonderful theater, the Vision Theater that had that wonderful mural. This is the gates to Esawan Bookstore. It's a lovely little indie bookstore. Picked up some books from there on time to time. On this street, on a clear day, you could just make out the Hollywood sign all the way right back there against those mountains. On a clear day, you could see the Hollywood sign. This was the community space of Lemert Park. It might look familiar to anybody who's watched the HBO series Insecure. This used to be known as Lucy Ethel. It was a community space and there were some vendors and they had a little bitty mini stage. I think they closed, but I think they're doing exterior shots for the show Insecure. Some locals on Degnan Street. I'm standing in front of Esawan Bookstore taking this picture. Just people who are gathering and making community, having conversation. In somebody's window, Save Lemert. It was a lovely neighborhood, and all the independent store owners and restaurateurs were such nice people. This was some street art on the asphalt. So I took a picture of that. That was pretty cool. There would be lots of great street art in the neighborhood. Some of the trees that had gone bare with gray sky. Flowers around the perimeter of the parking lot of our office space. Look how beautiful that color is. And some of the cacti also on the perimeter of the parking lot. Those big fat blooms, I love those. Some nice people over at the local McDonald's. The men would go and play chess. They didn't mind me taking their picture. They were such a lovely community of people. That's one thing I do miss. Some of my favorite red shoes on the curb by the street. This lovely house on the street where there were a lot of jacaranda trees. I don't know if you can make out, but there were 2 club chairs in the window. This house was for sale, and you could just see the 2 club chairs, but that was about it. I often wondered if those club chairs came with the house. It's a sweet little house. And there was a neighborhood, I think, out in Washington. You walk up the hill, and it was the affluent neighborhood near Leimert Park. And up in the hills, you could just make out the skyline of downtown Los Angeles. Again, on a cloudy day. So those were pictures. I sense that this has been going on for a while, so I'll see if I can zip through. Some artwork by Kelly Ray Roberts. I emailed her, I think, after the retreat, and I really loved this image, but she was no longer selling the print, and I asked if I could just download it to keep it on my inspiration board, and she was okay with that, because I wasn't going to sell it or use it anywhere else. I had it framed in my studio after the office, and then I put it in here. Oh no, yeah, that's what I did. A rubber stamp. It's cracking apart on the inside. Let me have my own way exactly in everything, and a sunnier and more pleasant creature does not exist. Thomas Carlyle. So this is a little spread. I learned to make funky little pockets by turning things up. Some tea here and a quote from a woman who used to sell tea in my favorite place, Ventura. Having tea enhances the creativity of people who desire to make the world a better place to live. Cindy Yoshitomi. She's a really wonderful lady. Her tea store is no longer open, but we're also connected on Facebook, so I hear about her and from her from time to time. But this was some Tazo passion fruit tea, and it was this really pretty color in the water. And I hoped that drinking some passion tea would help me reclaim some passion for work, but I still felt as gray as the dried puddle left from my tea bag, because that's the color it dried when all was said and done. I was really disappointed. I thought it would be purple, but it wasn't. Some other quotes. I'm just going to start flipping through kind of quickly. This is one of the other rubber stamps that was made for our office. Called it Lavender Phoenix. I love the phoenix and how it transforms, rises out of the ashes. Something I'd gotten or found locally. Alvin Ailey Dance Troupe, because I dance. I really loved having these women on my inspiration board. So they went into my book. More pockets, just little odds and ends that I would make at the office with, you know, some of the stamps, original, file, copy, original. Some silly little things my program director sent me by email. I cut them out, printed and cut them out. Famous quote by Oscar Wilde, be yourself because everyone else is already taken. So true. My page, some other things. Paths are made for walking. False evidence appearing real. Yes, false evidence appearing real. Don't think anybody would call me boardinary. Such a fun little word. This is a business card from the Lucy Florence location community area. I would spend a little time hanging out with the boys who owned that. Patty Dye's post office box. I contributed art to her books. So I kept this in here thinking I would write to her. I always meant to write to her, and there's like a little snippet of a big, longer story in there. Dealing with avocados, which I love, so it's a funny story. You'll just have to read her books to learn. the question isn't who is going to let me, it's who's going to stop me. Yeah, I did everything I could to change my circumstances, but there's only so far I can go on my own. A story from one of the storytellers around the Mert Park. He was a great storyteller. He was very sweet. I really encountered a lot of nice people in that neighborhood of Leimert Park. There were business cards of the local business owners. A lot of them closed over the time I was working there. Another pocket of little bits and pieces and tags of images from things that I came across. This became a list. Our IT guy didn't really know much about Mac, and his idea of security was to block anything that seemed even remotely foreign. So a lot of blogs that I followed eventually got blocked. So even my source of online communities started to get tighter and tighter as the end drew near. Another pocket of little fun tags. Here's a quote that I really liked. It means that the more time I spend working in and on someone else's business, the more I'm helping them achieve their goals and less time achieving mine. So there was a lot of online business that was starting back in 2008, 2009, 2010. We've had the technology, y'all. We've had it all along. And some things that relate to my job. Social safety net for the poor is now being knit into the California budget patchwork fix. And, you know, people thought that I lost my job because of budget issues. And the thing is, our program actually got a lot of funding from the LAUSD. And I don't think that was really part of that. But I don't really care anymore why they cut the program. I was only glad that they did because it meant that I would be free. And this is a miniature version of the pay cut letter. So I used to have a copy of the announcement that our program was closing, but I think I eventually got rid of that. And I don't need to keep a copy of it because as the assistant to the program director, I had to help draft that announcement letter. Oh, the irony. Yeah, I'll never forget that letter. I had to help draft it. Whatever. And it was all I could do to keep from jumping out of my chair with joy the day I got the news our program was going to be closed. Because it was the program manager who stepped into the directorship when my awesome boss left, and the program manager, whose work I'd been doing all along, stepped in. And she'd been with the organization for like 10 years, so she wasn't happy. So I had to keep my happiness to myself. I had to keep a lot to myself in this situation. So that is the Office Art Book. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed seeing these pages. I hope you enjoyed my story, and I'll find a way of sharing the essay below, and I'll see about trying to find a few links to things that I made reference to in my book. And feel free to subscribe to my channel. I share a lot of my art books all the time. And I have an online creative gathering that you are welcome to join, and I have lots of e-courses that I'll be building soon because online has been the wave of the future since I created this book. We have the technology. It's possible. So I hope you enjoyed this video and this flip through. Thank you so much for sitting through the whole thing. I'll see you again next time.